Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm super excited to have you here tonight. Our YU 2020 Summer of Opportunity is quickly coming to a close. Tonight is our final live event, and I think it's wonderful that we have a both a Syms and also a Cardozo alumnus with us, Reuven Falik. I'll introduce him in one moment. My name is Susan Bauer. I'm the Executive Director of the Career Center, for those who don't know me. And Reuven is currently counsel at Paul Weiss, Rifkind, Wharton Garrison, LLP. For those of you that are not familiar with the firm, it's one of New York's most prestigious law firms. And before joining the firm, Reuven worked at EY, which most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with. He was a manager, and prior to attending law school, he worked as a CPA at Arthur Andersen. So he really has had his hands in many different things. I'm very happy he's with us tonight as we talk about negotiation and what's possible to negotiate for at your place of employment. And please join me in welcoming Reuven to our event tonight.
Well, thank you very much. This is very exciting. I apologize in advance. I knew that some people are having difficulty connecting to the internet. Not just COVID, but then we had the storms. I am actually out in Pennsylvania right now on vacation with my family. It turns out that some YU connections are a little bit stronger than others because we are here with one other family who was my junior year college roommates at Yeshiva University, and just thrilled to be able to give back a little bit from what I do. As Susan had said, I started off, I was an accounting major. I worked at Arthur Andersen, which no longer exists, which is, so much of the big four. It was a big six, worked for a few years as a CPA, then went to law school, worked at E&Y in a comp and benefits group, a group of 10 people where 9 were lawyers. And then I switched to Paul Weiss, and I've been there for 15 years. It's a fascinating environment. And what we thought is this would be a great topic for individuals to talk about because, when I was first starting out, I really didn't know much about compensation, and what is compensation, the various aspects. So a little bit later on in the program, we will open this up and make it interactive as one can do during Zoom. I will also let people know as an added bonus, if you have questions after that, you could always reach me, at my work email. It's rfalik@paulweiss.com. I think if you type in my name, it probably pops up right away. If you look at the picture, you will see that I have aged because that's the picture when I first started as opposed to now. So not all of that is work related. Some of that is kind of life in general. So, but again, I'm very excited to spend a little bit of time together with you tonight. I apologize in advance if there'll be some background noise. This was the best place I was able to, sort of get the internet connection where we could do this. So, Susan, should we start off with the first question?
Yeah, so for our participants, I wanted to give you just a quick overview of the different topics that we will be covering tonight. We're going to talk about how you actually negotiate for your compensation, and what is compensation. Many people think like, oh, they offered me 60, but I really wanted 80. Oh, but I got, 120,000 options, and I got a free gym and a car service, and how to weigh all that. What dollar value do all the different components of compensation, how does that all add up? And the different functions within a startup or a company. In a startup, there are different things that you would negotiate for that are a lot different than in like a publicly traded company. And then we're going to talk a little bit about separation and termination. Sometimes that is not in one's control and no one knows it's coming. Sometimes one wants to separate themselves willingly from a company, and then both parties come to an agreement on the terms of that. And I think a lot of people that are separating or terminating from a company, they really focus on, I'm out the door and I'm on to my next gig, but they really don't think about the implications of that in the future and what they might need that company for, even though they're no longer working there, some things that they might want to have in place before they leave. So Reuven, we're going to start. If you can talk a little bit about, the timeline, or, the spectrum of everything on, how do you negotiate comp? How do you even start the conversation?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And again, it's not a one size fits all approach. Different companies will have different approaches. There are some very established companies where basically, you might be wondering why you tuned in for this seminar, because they say, this is what we do. And it's great. Your concerns or your questions are very, very valid, but I'm not going to change one word, because this has been vetted, and, maybe we can deal with something on a one-off, but this is the way that we do it. At the other end of the spectrum, sometimes you have some which are very, very accommodating, and they may not have even thought about it, especially towards the startup phase, where you're really, you're almost a partner, if you will, in that, and that, you could be towards the earlier employees. They haven't given a lot of thought of that. We have a lot of people who are Orthodox and Sabbath observant, myself, I am as well. And there are some of these concerns, which are very, very manageable in today's workforce. But one example might be, which comes up quite frequently, is, well, what about the holidays, which we're taking off? And we're not talking about Thanksgiving or a federal holiday, but rather if you have religious observance, that could easily be, 10 of the 12 allotted days which you might be given. In contrast, the company which I'm at right now, the law firm, it's the personal days, are unlimited, and one example is sort of religious observance. So that is a huge difference, that my vacation is actually vacation, and effectively I have been given an additional 2 weeks worth of vacation, in that regard, because I'm not having to take it. So the question is asked, and we'll try and answer it together. It's, what do you do for compensation? Well, a few years ago, there weren't really that many laws on this, but now there's also been a landscape sort of where it's been shifting, where you're not necessarily as an employer allowed to ask or inquire in various states about your prior pay. That cannot happen. A candidate can offer that, and if they do, or say what their expectation is, but you're not allowed to ask as an employer how much you were getting paid. So that's a problem, right? Where it sort of changed, certainly for the recruiters, for individuals, for employers, and elsewhere. So the first step is to sort of figure out, just like whenever you're looking to buy something, you should always try and figure out what a good price is in your mind, in your head beforehand. Because otherwise, whatever the offer is might sound great or it might sound bad. So somebody might say, as an employer, I'm going to give you $53,000. And you're saying the day before, I have a lot of student debt. This sounds great. But it might also not be great. It's hard to tell. You need to know what's the number first, sort of where the market might be at, where there's kind of a range, right? The big four accounting firms are at a certain place, and, the other firms and some consulting, there's some publicly available information. So you can look and get an expectation, or in talking with people, as to what you think first the dollar amount might be. But that's a misleading number also, because somebody might say, okay, let's just assume that the number is $60,000. Well, that sounds great, and I'm going to give a 20% bonus. Well, first you say, well, what is then my number? So 6 times 2 is 12, so that means I'd be making $72,000 a year. The question is are you going to actually get that bonus guaranteed, or is it a bonus? Is it only based on your individual performance? Is it based on company performance? Is there a combination? Then, it's fair for somebody to ask, what is the expectation, even if the bonus is not guaranteed? Some companies pay out at below target, actually at target, or above target. So they might say, in a company that, if you exceed your goals and the company exceeds their goals, which might be EBITDA, revenue, sales, something else, you might end up getting 200% of your target bonus. So in that case, you could be getting 40% of the boat, as opposed to 20%. So 40% off of 60, you're talking about, 24,000 plus 60 is $84,000. Additionally, you'd want to look and see, well, what the benefits are. And typically, that there is employer provided healthcare, medical coverage, and this is normally done on a subsidized basis. So the employer pays a portion of it and you pay a portion of it. And because the employer is sometimes a bit larger, they can negotiate a better range, or a better outcome, and therefore that medical coverage is quite good. So depending on how much they're going to pay and you're going to pay, you can look at this together. You then look, as I said before, at the paid time off. Are you going to have vacation? Right now, the paradigm has shifted a little bit where not everybody, but most people are working remotely. Well, that's a big advantage, when hopefully when the pandemic ends, some people will be more amenable to letting people work at home 1 day a week or 2 days a week. And that, while you don't necessarily put a dollar value on it, aside for, the saving the time for commuting, and the fact that you have, the additional accessibility, you can either go to the gym earlier, you can deal with the family earlier, you could do something later. These are huge sort of tangible benefits. So what you need to do is typically look at everything which is being offered first. Well, what is this? How am I going to end up? So then the question is, that's their offer. Is there room for negotiation? Can one then say, well, gee, this is very attractive, but I would really like it if, are you able to do something more? Instead of it being 60,000, can we get 70,000? Can you guarantee my first year bonus that it will be not less than 20%, so that I know that I can spend at least that much? Can you give me a 2-year guarantee? Can you tell me this is year 1, but if things go well, here's what we expect for year 2? Now, that is a very, very important conversation to have, because the lower your base salary is, the larger the percentage increase that they can give you doesn't necessarily correlate to absolute dollars. So for example, if an employer gives you $70,000 and you think that you're going to be going up and up and up, and you think that you did a great job and that in 2 years that you should be making $100,000, just for example, and the employer says, no, I gave you a 20% raise, but 20% on 70 only puts you at 94. Now, most people would be jumping up and down with the 20% raise, but 20% on a lower number is not the same. So sometimes you have to look at the absolute dollar amount as well. And it is helpful to see sort of what the career progression could be, even if it's not going to be guaranteed, because very few employers are willing to say, this is your salary for year 1, and this is it for year 2, and this is it for year 3, and these are your bonus. You can at least level set the expectations where if I'm doing a good job and you're happy with me and I'm happy with you, here is what I will be paid. So, and that, sometimes, the benefits increase. You end up getting more paid days off. You start off at, 5 or 10 or 15. Let's say a lot are at 10. But after, the second year, it could be 15. Well, that's a very, very big difference. I think that folks should normally look at the words on the page very carefully. A lot of times also, a rookie mistake is people think that then they're getting the bonus and that it's guaranteed. As I've said, several times, a bonus is not guaranteed unless it says it's guaranteed. Typically, it requires that you be there through the end of the year. Sometimes it requires you being there beyond the end of the year through the payment date. And that could be a few months later, so you'd still have to be there. And, you might think that, oh no, I was getting that money. But the employer might think something different. And what typically happens, with mid-year hires is that that bonus is then prorated. So imagine you start in June or July to make it easier. You haven't been there for a calendar year company. You haven't been there for 6 months. So let's say that again, that the bonus is 50%. And let's make the base salary $100,000 for this example. So you think that your compensation is going to be $150,000, but it's not, because even assuming everything goes well, since you were only there for 6 months of the year, they're going to prorate that and then give you $25,000. It is possible to negotiate sometimes and say that the first year will not be prorated, and one can ask for that. And that's a lot, it's a lot more common to do so when there's a delay in hiring. Let's say, it's the company needs more approval, or they weren't ready first to bring you on, but you were ready, and, or you were going to either leave another job or so. So you want to be made whole for that regard. In the startup context, where they don't really have necessarily the established arrangements as much, it's easier to express, some of the concerns. So we haven't spoken yet about equity or stock options. One can't spend or monetize a stock option. What an option is, it's a valuable tool. It says, I, the employer, will let you purchase a certain number of shares of my stock at the following exercise price, which is the same price that a share of stock is. So let's assume that my share of stock, this was Coca-Cola, is at $100. It means that you can purchase Coca-Cola for $100, and I'll give you 10 shares, subject to you working for 4 years. And each year you can purchase 2.5 shares. The numbers could just as easily be hundreds of thousands. So that option is valuable if it appreciates. If the underlying stock price in a year of Coca-Cola goes from my example of 100 to 110, then you can pay $100 to purchase something which is worth $110. So that's valuable. In a public company context like that, you can actually monetize those options. And when I say monetize, it means you could then sell that public company stock to somebody else. In a private company context, there is no market for that. So even though you could purchase the share of stock, you would then have an illiquid security where there would be taxes due. So typically, the private companies are looking for an exit, and the exit is normally one of a few ways. One is if they can sell it to another buyer, for a lot of money, and then hopefully that then the equity gets cashed out. So in that case, again, you were granted an option at the beginning, and let's assume this is a startup. The stock is worth $1. You're granted an option at $1, and now somebody buys the company where the stock is worth $10. So that's great. You're going to get $9 worth of appreciation. In another context, you have it where, but again, you cannot sell that beforehand. So you can't spend it. You can't, you have to look at your own individual finances. When you're younger, perhaps, and starting out, you might be willing to take a lower salary and take more in equity on the chance that this is going to appreciate. Again, if something goes from $1 to $10, that's much better than getting $1 of salary, because you're not going to make a 10x return. Options are not the only sort of equity which is given. There's also something which is called restricted stock, which works. There's no exercise price. So that says, the employer, will give you a share of stock, or 10 shares of stock, or 25,000 shares of stock, subject to you working here. Let's make it, I'll give you 40,000 shares of stock, or 400 shares of restricted stock units. And if you work here for 4 years, you'll be fully vested. After each year, you'll vest in a fourth of it, which means after year one, where you had 40,000 shares or 4,000 shares or 400 shares, you would then have that number, so if the stock started off and the stock appreciates, you can do very, very well. If the stock doesn't appreciate, or if you don't stay the required amount of time, or if there's a performance metric and that performance metric is not achieved, which might be, the number of sales, or a company, again, as I said, EBITDA, that there's a certain return, then you might not get paid anything for that. And those are basically essentially forfeited. So one should look holistically at what they're offering. And again, it's the same thing for equity. Well, what are you offering in year one? And what do you expect to be offering in year two and year three? And it's a fair question to ask, what as an employer, should I be able to expect in this regard, assuming that things are going well? The base case scenario, the best scenario right now with the COVID pandemic, it's very hard to tell, but it's very fair to ask, well, what have people been getting? This is not really necessarily in the startup, but in the ones where you're established a little bit more. Well, what did people in my situation get, the year before, and the year before? In other words, if you say that the target bonus is 25%, but we could pay out up to 3x or 2x. Well, what have people gotten? And if the company has historically paid a lot more, that's a good sign. If they say, yeah, we've never met our targets, you shouldn't assume that you're getting that. You'd want to look at it together. So that was a mouthful first. And, it is hard, for people to focus in on all of this, especially, as I said at the beginning, many times it's the first offer. You get it, you show it to somebody else, you don't know what to do, you're excited. It might be the first job out. It's helpful to ask a friend or to ask, people in I know Weiss got career services, there is anecdotal data. You can also reach out, to individuals who can do some research. I get questions routinely from, people who are very sophisticated who don't understand sort of the compensation aspects. It's there's no shame in asking about it. It's not a secret. You don't need to broadcast first what somebody's offering you per se, but it's fine to find out. So, it's difficult, I know, because right now this isn't necessarily interactive, although again, we will open it up to questions, I think, shortly, but hopefully that gives a good introductory framework.
Reuven, I have 3 questions for you at this point. So the first question, which we have had many students come to the Career Center with, some employers require employees, potential employees, candidates in the interview process to fill out an application, whether it be on a piece of paper or whether it be through an app. And we have had students that have showed us these applications where it says, what is your current salary? Now, I know that you are not obligated to respond to that and that it is illegal for employers to ask. But as a 20-year-old or a 21-year-old who doesn't want to turn off an employer, who doesn't have any experience doing this, what should they write in that blank? Or do they just leave it blank?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And it turns out, there is not a federal law in New York, in the United States, there is not a federal law which prohibits it. So it does vary state by state and jurisdiction by jurisdiction. It could even be in certain cities where there are different ordinances. So it's relatively new. The larger employers now, they have national labor firms who are constantly monitoring this, and they are eliminating some of those questions, because in some of these cases, there could actually be significant liability to the employer, for actually, asking that question. And that wouldn't be good if you were going to a company which actually could be facing, a lot of liability. Now, this is hard, right, for a 20-year-old, absolutely. One thing to do is, if there's a person, or if this is going through, there's a contact, you could say like, oh, I thought that this question, wasn't permitted. If it's just an app, one can reach out through the through the sometimes through the help desk, through the website as to what it is. But if not, it's fine to put that down, first as 0, because one, if you're a student, your current salary is 0.
Right.
And try and see. I do not believe that one is going to be disqualified from that. If somebody's comfortable saying again, there's no problem saying what your expectation might be. And as I said, at some of the larger ones, again, that's great, but they're not going to change anything. And the reason why they're not going to change anything is because we get into this in negotiations all the time. Once one person is exceptional, everyone is exceptional. And an employer may prefer to lose, the right candidate rather than have to negotiate individually with 100 candidates. So it's a lot easier to say everybody at this level, a staff 1 accountant, a number 1 consultant, whatever a basic, level 1 or whatever that is, this is what we pay. We pay in this bandwidth, or between, 60 to 80 or 50, 3. And the reason why they may want to do that is because you could then say, wait a minute, there's 30 of us. I'm better than this one. You're getting this, I'm getting that. It could create too many headaches for the large employer, and you may not have had a chance to differentiate yourself, and it's very, very common in the large accounting firms, in the large, law firms, and things like that. Everybody sort of starts off, at a certain level, and they're not going to vary it. Somebody might say you could start a day later. They might, make an exception for that. You were planning a wedding, there was a family event. I don't want this to count towards my vacation for the first year, because I was going to go away for 2 weeks. I'm happy to start now and then do that. But otherwise, it can be very difficult. So my advice on that is that, again, don't automatically assume it's illegal, but you can always check. And even a quick Google search will tell you that. There is 0. You can also, if there's an other column at the end, you can say like that, again, I'm happy to talk about expectations, or I look forward to, meeting with you. Hopefully that answers the question sufficiently. I know it's cold comfort, again, when you're looking for the job. And of course, it's very, very easy when you have 3 jobs, you can match them up against each other. But when you're looking for the first job,
Sure.
and a lot of times it's true, when it rains, it pours. If you get 1 job, you get 3 jobs. But when you don't have 1 job, you're looking at it, you're very, very eager for it. And sometimes it makes sense to take a job. You get your foot in the door and you show that you do a good job, as long as there's an expectation from both you and the employer that, if you're doing well, that, your year 2 or in 6 months or, in year 3, that something, will be, at the right track, or it might even be better than what you were thinking. Then it's a question, are you betting on yourself, and are you betting on the employer as well?
Okay, so my next question, which I just actually had a lesson in myself, I was trying to budget for an FTE for my department. And when I gave finance the salary number, they said to me, well, that's not the real salary number because you tack on 25% for the fringe. So in a company where they might say your starting salary is $60,000. Now, as an employee, you might think, well, is there a disability? Is there life insurance? Is there pet insurance? Instead of asking all those questions, can a candidate say, is it okay to say what percentage of my salary is fringe? And if the employer says 20%, or if they say 60%, you know what your real total comp is. Like, is that an okay question to ask?
So there's nothing wrong with the question, except I'm about to caveat and say I would absolutely not ask that question, because,
Okay.
When you ask a question, you want to see what the answer is, and the answer will actually be misleading to you.
Okay.
So here's why. It's from the employer perspective. First, what we're going to do is we're going to help people out with the acronym. FTE means full-time equivalent.
Sure. Right.
And that's something which comes out, you say, what do you mean? How could there be 37 and a half employees at the company? And that happens to be because you might have 6 people who are working, part-time, and one might be 2 days a week, and one might be 4. But when you're looking from the finance perspective, they want to know how many people do you have, not necessarily is Reuven there and is Joseph there and is Sarah, Nicole and Yocheved and Nava and Daniel, and Janae there, but rather who are these numbers? I have 7 people at this salary, because again, saying I have 2 people, if I have one person who makes 50,000 and one person who makes 400,000, it's not an average
Right.
on that. So first, it's very important from an employer perspective to know for the FTEs. In terms of what benefits are, not all benefits are equal to each person. It's normally when you're younger, you're not as worried, in kind of the pre-COVID, thinking about disability and long-term disability and some larger benefits which are there. It's nice to know that there is a suite of benefits that the company may have that they may have, I had once where it was prepaid legal services, where I had to pay $5 and somebody would draft a will for me, so it was like, that was great because they had this service and, because they contracted with so many people. But the fact is what the company pays for that doesn't have a bearing on the benefit that you'll get. So I look at this, and in fact, I'm looking to buy some companies for my clients now, where first we look and we say, okay, we're looking at one where there's 3,000 employees. We said the salary is roughly X, and that the benefits rate, it's that is roughly, 30% of that. And that means that's how much we're paying for a 401k and for medical and our portion of that, and for dental and for vision and for an employee assistance program. If the company says, yes, but I'm giving you all of that, they're not actually giving you an additional 30%. They're giving you that availability. You might be better off or worse off. You can't really negotiate that. So if it turns out, unfortunately, that you needed the disability insurance, you will do much, much better, right? From having that, it will pay off a lot more of your salary. It could be 2/3 of your salary. If you had to go out, there were people, when my wife was pregnant, that actually is surprisingly under the laws, it's considered a disability, but that means that you get a certain amount of your salary, it's covered for that. If you're having back surgery is something else. So I don't think it's what I would do instead is typically I like to say, this sounds very intriguing, and again, I'd like to know a little bit more about your benefits. And typically the companies have a brochure. And when I say brochure, it's not a 2-page glossy one. They may have a highlight also. There's an employee handbook, and then there's a standard, document, which has a summary of plan benefits, which is under federal laws, it's going to be required to be written in plain English. And it'll explain a bunch of these benefits, and you can look towards that as to what the suite is. And really the question to you is, what's the cost? Some of these are 100% employer paid. And some of these, there's a cost sharing between the employer and the employee. As I said, for medical, it's the employer might pay, 60% or 70% or 80%. And that means you're paying the remaining amounts. But then for some of the other benefits, where it's 100% employer paid. So you can look at that. Again, that's not something which you can spend absent a specific situation. I would never take that into account as, my full number. So if somebody said, as an employer, yes, I'm giving you 60,000 and then our benefits are 30%, it's an intangible. You want to look at that, but you shouldn't think that basically you're at $78,000. It's a valuable benefit. In contrast, if you were not an employee, but an independent contractor, you would have to go out and buy these benefits on your own. So you would probably choose less. You would have to, sign up for a medical plan, and that might be through the government marketplace. You probably wouldn't get these ancillary larger benefits. So there is value to it, but again, it's not a strict dollar for dollar.
Okay, thank you. And then my third question is, what if in your head you wanted 90,000 and the employer says we're offering 75 and you're able to get it up to 80 and they say we're firm at 80, and then you think of your budget and you think of what you need and you think of all your own personal expenses, and because employers get so many services at a discount, where it costs them actually less than what you would pay for maybe a phone or a gym or a car or parking or all those things, are those things that could bridge the gap? Like, could you say, okay, great. So we're settled on, I wanted 90, we're settled on, 78 for salary. Is there any way that I could get, my phone paid for and a gym membership? And I'm not saying list them all at once, but are those things that people can ask for to get them where they need to be?
Yeah, sometimes. So there's two ways to go about that. First, again, sometimes they're firm, other times that they're not. But let's assume that then they are. Another way to say that is like, okay, but what about, can we guarantee it, sort of for year end, so that I know I'm getting X, or that's it, and, because they might not have, or that, in 6 months, it will go up to Y, another 5,000, or that next is what we need. It is possible to ask about these other things. Sometimes it's that, I'd like this, or, what else do we have kind of for the phone. But in my mind, it's much better to not, I don't want to say nickel and dime, but I will tell you, negotiating from the employer perspective and dealing with this with CEOs, to, very senior executives, where sometimes they're very, very high stakes, it can put an employer off. And you realize not all requests are treated equally. So if somebody asks for 10 things, you might say, this is just too much trouble. It's not worth it. The person's not going to be happy. I normally like to target something and say, okay, what is it that would really make it better for me if we could get it? I understand the wish list and you're narrowing it down. The other thing which might be worth is, they might say, sure, you asked for these 10 and I gave you 5 of them. Now, again, and I'm not advocating asking for 10, but the 5 they gave you are worth almost something. You think, sure, once a month I'm giving you free movie tickets, just for example. But you thought instead you were getting, a new iPhone, right? That they're going to pay, they're going to give you a budget, right, for buying, and something, an iPad, or, an iPhone, So if somebody says, sure, instead I gave you, a bus pass, for $50, but instead, you could have gotten $500, you're really kind of worse off. So I always like to sort of target the request. It's fine to make the list first and then figure out like what would be good, what's easy enough for them. But I normally think, again, from the employer, I'm like, does this seem like it's not worth it? Like, is somebody asking for that? And if you could think about it sort of, with the little child, your little brother, your little sister, where they start asking again and again and again, you're like, but I gave you a cookie and I gave you the sprinkles and I gave you that. Like, yes, I understand each request might be reasonable in a vacuum. We might prefer to instead have something where it's, just done. And I will tell you, around, now it's 50 minutes ago, I was on a call. So this was, again, as you get more senior in your careers, also where they wanted to know, the clients who were very sophisticated wanted to know, are we done? That's the question that they want to know, because they didn't want somebody to come back, and this was for negotiating for a very high level executive. I don't want somebody coming back after we've done this and, well, what about this? And can you do that? Are they happy? Are we done? And I reported out that, yes, we are. It's like, absent the person, unfortunately, taking ill, they're done. They are ready and committed. And, I have their word and I have their lawyer's word on that, no new asks will occur at this point. And that's important because, if somebody says, gee, I'm not sure, I don't want the person to ghost me, that they're going to go, we go down this path and now I need to hire somebody else. So there is something about finality. And there's also something about how people disappointment, or let's say not managed expectations, at the beginning. You say, look, I wanted, to your example, Susie, I wanted 90, they were at 78, we were able to settle at 82 or so. Okay. But now, if you come in and you have a gripe, with them, gee, I didn't get that 8, they're not going to be happy. It's not the right job for you. You shouldn't go in and assume that, it's automatically going to be change. It's, if you are accepting the job, you can have an expectation. You can lay that out. Here's what I want for next year. I see, as I'm trying to do this, that there's a question, when should one bring up the issue of being an observant Jew on the holidays? So again, it varies, for folks. I was always open and notorious, I guess, about it. I go by my name, Reuven, or Reuven. They get Reuven wrong, but Reuven right all the time. My English name is actually Brian. It's Brian, and my Hebrew name was Reuven, but I've always used Reuven, and I've never had a problem with that. And I've worn a yarmulke, is for the men, not the women, at every job which I was at, on the theory that I'm going to be taking off these days anyway. It's whether that there's a good relationship or a bad relationship. I want people to know about that, and this is when I'm available. And it has never been a hindrance in my career, and I've been at several places. I always let people know, right, in the winter months, that, okay, perhaps this is normally after the job starts, or, when you're accepting the job. But I let them know, again, I'm Sabbath observant if I haven't worked with somebody. And even now when I negotiate with people, because sometimes things do happen on the weekends, I let them know that I'm Sabbath observant and I'm not ignoring your email or your voicemail or something, and that rather here is when I will respond back to you. And I have found, in my career, the fact is that typically you're a little bit more responsive because I may be doing something on a Saturday night or after the holiday. So I don't think you need to start off first on day one and say, by the way, and I want, $82,000. And by the way, this is when Shavuot is, which happens to be 9 months from now, and I'm planning on taking off. In the New York metro area, most people are aware of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and not necessarily Sukkot and some others. But again, it's very, very manageable in today's age and environment with the right work ethic, and I have not found it to be an impediment. So I think it's fine to do so. It's obviously each situation can be different. It would be different if you were the only person, for IT support. If the company was hiring one and they need somebody to be there, every Friday night to Saturday night, well, that's not the job for you. If it turns out that IT is being shared or consulting is being shared, amongst two people, that's fine. It happens to be that I've covered for my colleagues. I've told them that when you're off for Christmas, I don't celebrate that. I want you to be able to celebrate with your family and do that. And it's, it's very much appreciated. And you'll actually, find the collegiality towards that. So I'm sorry, I think that Susan, you may have had another question.
Yeah, I have one more. A lot of people, when they start their job, they're so excited and they think, I'm going to work here forever. This is my dream job. I love it. But with the environment that we're in now and with such an uncertain economy, a lot of people will get separated, will get furloughed. Things will happen that have nothing to do with performance. So that being said, is it negative or is it weird when you're negotiating to start a job to ask, what's your separation package? Should some, you know what I mean? Like, or do you have to
Susan,
wait?
That's an excellent question. And again, very, very sophisticated folks do not think about that. And the way that I like to think about that is, this is great. We're dealing with the honeymoon, but let's think about the divorce, and should there be a prenup? And hopefully, the marriage goes on forever. But in today's environment, or anyone, the world is very, very different. And there's no problem asking about that. It doesn't show that you're a bad sport or you're thinking about leaving. I'm more impressed, on both sides, on the employer and the employee, that somebody's thinking about it. Again, not negotiating every last detail, right? Because if everybody is concerned so much about leaving, then they, you say, well, wait a minute, are they really trying to be here? But it's a perfectly fine question to ask, and especially as you're moving from job one to job two, where there could also be restrictive covenants, which we'll get into in a minute, a non-compete or a non-solicit, where you may be prohibited from doing a certain type of work or going to certain select companies, to understand what will happen if your employment is terminated. Because you're still going to have bills to pay. You may be paying rent, you may have childcare, you may have, a family event which you're planning, you may be planning a wedding, there's lots of things, and you can't pay that with a promise, going in debt, for an IOU, and you do want to know what that is. So if somebody says, yes, in the event you're terminated, if you're terminated for cause, and cause is not, again, it's not a federal rule, it's a man-made thing where again, it will say cause will be defined in your offer letter or in the company's handbook or in an employment agreement. For certain bad acts, you should assume that you are not getting any severance, right? Because an employer says, wait a minute, I am not paying you other than if vacation is required to be paid out by law, and not all states require that. You should assume that you are not being paid anything. But if the company decides, and the same way, if you decide you just want to walk away, you know what, this isn't working out, I'd like to leave, I'd appreciate it if you pay me, you should also assume that you're not getting paid anything. If, in contrast, the company terminates you without cause, so they terminate you, or sometimes you have a construct which is known as good reason. It's in the contractual agreement that it's harder to get, when you're lower down, first starting out. But if the company reduces your base salary, if they require you to relocate, if they materially change certain terms, it's as if they've constructively terminated and you're free to quit. Then many times it says you will get severance, which could be a certain number of weeks per year of service, or 3 months or 6 months or something like that. Normally that severance is conditioned on the employee who is about to be a former employee signing a release of claims, meaning, sure, we will pay you this, provided that you release us from all claims, and 2, there's normally a restrictive covenant attached. They don't want to pay you and find out you're going straight over to the competitor or you're going to the key clients. Now, non-competes might not be enforceable in certain areas, in certain states, and depending on how narrowly defined the restrictions are. So it's perfectly fine to ask that question and to say, look, I hope that we're together for a long time, both you and I. But if I'm terminated by you, again, without cause, what is the package? And what are the restrictions? So if it says, sure, but you're not allowed to work in a 30-mile radius, I was actually just in this group of doctors where they're not able to, they happen to get millions of dollars, but they're not able to go someplace else within a 20-mile radius. And they can go 22 miles away and open up a practice, but they can't compete, and that was sort of the price being paid. So it is worthwhile to look at that, because you want to find out, well, what happens if they terminate me tomorrow? How, what am I going to have? Do I know? It doesn't prevent you if the company is bankrupt, because again, there's still a promise to pay, but they may not have the money to pay it. But let's assume that it's not a bankrupt company, that that you have sort of that safety net, more or less, that you could be provided a certain number. So it's a fair question to ask. I actually like it when people ask, again, respectfully, because it shows me that they're thinking, and I want a critical thinker, when I'm working for somebody. And I want to relate that to an earlier point, which we just had. I know we only have a few minutes left, where it's the same way where I sort of evaluate. If somebody comes back to me with 27 issues, on an employment agreement, right, which I've prepared for the introductory one, say, why is this important? For all 27, this is going to be a difficult person to work with. It's different if you say, I've gone through it, and here are my top 5, or this is, like sort of address. And I have a few, minor other things perhaps we could talk about it, or maybe do that. Then I know that there's a path forward, and whether that's a day or a week or a month, whatever that is, as opposed to, gee, this is going to be forever. It's what some people call salami tactics, because you slice off an individual, the first part of the salami, and then you have more, and then you slice out more and more and more. It's also known as some kind of death by 1,000 cuts. You don't want that as an employer. So I think that those are fine to ask. It's, again, I like where people are thinking critically. They're saying, look, what is our expectation, if I do well and we do well? Because you want to show that you're a gung-ho person, that you're ready to do well. And what is the expectation? I'm doing well, the company's doing well. Where do you see that? What can I do in order to increase this? You know, it's, would next year, would the options of the equity be double? You know, if I move into the next level, or, you know, if I go from a level 1 to a level 2, or if I'm the top ranked at level 2, you know, what can I be? Now for the smaller, you know, kind of startups, a lot of this, it's not necessarily the Wild West, but there is a lot more flexibility, and it can be, sure, you know, you start taking on more responsibility, your job may actually evolve, you know, a little bit more, and, you know, they may realize they don't need to hire somebody else. They only need to, as Susan was saying before, for an FTE, they might only need to hire another, you know, person for 2 days a week. Well, then they're not going to have to pay benefits for that person. So there is a savings to the company of that 30%. Mm-hmm. You know, there could be some of that cost sharing. You know, you might not get all 30%. You may be able to get another 15% where they don't have to pay that, because somebody doesn't pay your benefits twice. I'm cognizant of the fact that, you know, we have 6 minutes left or so. And I did want to open it up where there could be others, I guess, if there are questions. I don't know if those are going just directly to you, Susan. If not, I've always got more stuff to say. This is something which is, you know, takes up a lot of time, but is, you know, of critical importance.
So, yeah, you know, at this time, if there's anyone in our event tonight who has a question, and you have yet to put it in the chat, please feel free to ask it now. And if you have a question that you don't want to ask in front of the group, or it's more of a personal question about your own negotiation that you have going on, I can definitely give you Reuven's contact information, and you can reach out to him directly for advice. Like, I understand that a lot of these negotiations can be very personal in nature. So if there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat now if you'd like to share those.
Right. So I got a question where it says, if you're offered a position at your dream employer, at what point do you say that you don't want to negotiate because of the risk of jeopardizing the opportunity and just take the first offer you receive? So again, if you're confident, you know, that this is great, you're happy with it, one doesn't need to negotiate. You know, that's a win-win sort of for everyone. It's still good to have the conversation, even if you say, by the way, and I'm planning on accepting, but I'd like to understand, you know, where you see this, you know, like what you see for year 2 and year 3, or in 3 and 5, you know, is there room for advancement? Because I say, yeah, that was it, but, you know, you're never going to move up. You know, we can't have that. You know, it's, again, if it's insufficient, you know, I mean, then it's probably not your dream employer. I will tell you, you know, we had this personally, and I was dealing with somebody who the job could not have been better. Everything lined up perfectly, except the salary wasn't workable. And it was just the dream job. It was exactly, it ticked every box. They said, it doesn't matter because it's not going to work out for you. And it's just not going to work out on that. Like, if you can't afford it, and you can't bridge that gap where there was no way. I mean, the two were just so far apart, you know, you don't want to take it and find out that then it's not right. So it's fine. I think, again, it shows initiative, you know, to sort of ask, you know, showing again that, you know, I'm doing great, but you can also indicate in that, and I am planning on accepting that, you know, it's, you know, I'm wondering, you know, can we do this, or is this possible? And sometimes people will say, and I've had this many times also, I can't guarantee that, but you have my word. And, you know, do you want to bet on me the way that I'm betting on you? More often than not, if you get that, I would take that, because I'd say, like, look, we're invested together, you know, and just because it was contractual otherwise, you know, there are a million ways to sort of invalidate or say, you know, the performance wasn't achieved. And I'd rather have something like that, you know, again, so it's not a requirement. People should not take away from this. You know, you get something, you must negotiate, you know, and sometimes you say, oh, I should take this. But it's still fine to have that conversation. And I like to let people know, again, that then they're going to have that. I don't know if there were other questions. I'm not seeing it first in the group chat. I mean, I'm sure that there are questions, and I know that there are some people who'll be watching this after. Did you have one, Susan?
I have one more question. Yeah, this has come up more with alumni and not entry-level applicants or candidates. If you're in a position and you're trying to negotiate for more money, and that's not a possibility, do you think it's smart to negotiate for title?
Yes, it depends. And the answer is yes, on that. I mean, it is unfortunate. Sometimes one has to leave in order to, to
Right.
go someplace else. And that's a shame because it costs more for everyone and you may want to stay, but you want to look and then see, well, what is that? And sometimes, by the way, the title could then actually put you in line. So the next band is what they call it. It could put you in line for a larger percentage of a bonus pool. Or next year where there is a budget, they can do that. And they can all say, okay, you're at this title, but you haven't gotten a raise. So that is something which also is extrinsically, it shows, right, that you've moved up. Now, if you got title inflation, if you're there, kind of on day one and, all of a sudden you're listed as the grand supreme, ruler of the company, nobody's going to, evaluate that. But if you're able to show that, yes, the typical path is, the consultant is, consultant, kind of year one, and then consultant year two and consultant year three, but said, no, an exceptional person, moved up to, advanced consultant or senior consultant or, associate, to assistant, or to VP, or to EVP or something like that. That can be quite valuable because that can be leveraged, to other companies, in the future or when they are in a position. So I do think that is a worthwhile endeavor. That being said, you can't spend it, so it's, again, the same advice, which I have now. Look, if you can't get something else, you don't want to burn a bridge, right? Get a title, still be upset and leave them the next day or after that, because it is a very small world, right? From a business perspective, and things come around and you never know what happens. It's the manager who you left, who may have had to fight to get you this title where there wasn't the money, and then you leave, right? So he or she looks bad to their boss. They may end up at the next company that you're at, a year later or 5 years later. And they're not going to remember all the circumstances of this, but they're going to remember that they were not treated appropriately, and that can harm you a lot more. So I've had this with some people where also we've gone up, let's say, sometimes it does happen, right? You negotiate, they give you the title, and then the dream job, as somebody said, comes, you weren't looking for it, or somebody comes back and they are offering you so much more money. That's perfectly fine to go and then say to the employer, like, I wanted to stay. I'm not looking for a counter offer, but I can't turn this down. The other company was, giving me this better title and they were giving me, 40% more money. Well, there may be a hurt feeling, but most people, I'd say 9 times out of 10, they say, no, I understand. And I had this actually just recently. There was a company who was offering 75% more money. So we couldn't say, and we weren't going to pay that. It wasn't worth it from the employer perspective. I didn't say, well, wait a minute, you were just promoted. We understood that. He wasn't looking. This came, he brought it to us. He wasn't saying, look, and you need to match this or I'm leaving. He's like, how can I possibly turn it down? And to do that respectfully and to provide the appropriate transition, of course, I'm here to stay and to help transition, and I will do that coverage and I could pick up the phone after and talk to you. That's very, very important. But that's what that would be my advice.
I want to thank you very much. I am being cognizant of the time. So our session for tonight is over. And for those of you who were students participating in the YU 2020 Summer of Opportunity program, you will be receiving a survey tomorrow so we can assess how successful this inaugural program was. And if we'd like to repeat it next summer. So if you are a participant in the summer program, please look out for that tomorrow. If you have any questions for Reuven, please reach out to myself or to Todd Lotchpike, our Director of Employer and Alumni Relations within the Career Center, and we can put you in touch with Reuven for any follow-up questions. It's always nice to have a guest on our calls. It's even better when it's part of our family. So thank you so much, Reuven, for joining us tonight.
This was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for letting me share some time with you. I wish everybody the best of luck. And again, I am available for the questions. So have a good night, everyone.
You as well. Thank you so much.